The kitchen of Le Revitoil crackled with tension. Silver pans clattered, knives sliced with precision, and the scent of butter and garlic filled the air. At the center of it all stood Chef Moreau, a towering figure in his pristine whites, his voice booming like a whip. "Non! Non! Imbeciles," he barked, his French sharp but clumsy, flinging insults at the waiters who scrambled to obey. Each mistake became an excuse for him to parade his authority, his broken French wielded like a sword. The staff laughed nervously, some whispering about the irony, half his words weren't even correct. At the back of the kitchen, almost invisible, Clara Bennett scrubbed pots, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Flour dusted her apron, her hair tucked beneath a faded scarf. She kept her head down, enduring the chaos, enduring the arrogance. To them, she was just a maid, the lowest rank in a palace of culinary egos. But as Chef Moreau spat out another insult, mingling the language he claimed to master, Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. No one knew her secret, the gift she had hidden for years. And soon, the silence they forced upon her would end, with words that would leave the entire kitchen stunned. The evening service at Le Revitoil was always a storm. Waiters darted between tables, balancing trays of champagne flutes and silver platters, while sous chefs shouted orders over the roar of sizzling pans. But above them all, louder than the clamor of knives and flames, was Chef Moreau. He moved through the kitchen like a general on a battlefield, barking commands in his heavy, flawed French. "Allez, vite! You are slow like turtles. Incroyable, stupide." His accent twisted words into unrecognizable shapes, yet no one dared correct him. To do so would mean a verbal lashing, maybe even dismissal. Tonight, however, he was particularly vicious. A young waiter had fumbled a tray, nearly spilling wine on a wealthy patron. Moreau seized the opportunity to unleash his wrath. "Tu es, comme dire, un donkey." He jabbed a finger toward the trembling waiter, mixing French with English in a grotesque display of arrogance. The kitchen erupted in uneasy laughter, the kind meant to appease power rather than mock it. Clara, from her place at the sink, heard every word. Her hands moved automatically, scrub, rinse, stack, while her mind caught each mangled phrase like a thorn. The French language, one she had once studied with love and reverence, was being desecrated before her eyes. She bit her tongue, as she always did, and remained silent. Moreau wasn't finished. Spotting another waiter moving too slowly, he shouted again. "Regardez. He walks comme un snail. Useless. Completely useless." He turned to his sous chefs, who laughed obligingly, though the amusement never reached their eyes. It was survival, nothing more. The humiliation spread like wildfire. Each staff member became a target in turn. A misplaced spoon, a delay in timing, even the sound of a dropped fork brought down a torrent of mockery. His insults grew sloppier, his French collapsing under the weight of his anger. Yet the room bent around him, afraid to stand straight. And then his eyes fell on Clara. She was quiet, nearly invisible, stacking clean pots in the corner. But in the chaos of his rage, Moreau decided even she was fair game. "And you, maid," he bellowed, switching back to his half-baked French. "Pourquoi so slow? Two travails come, how you say, cow?" Laughter erupted again, sharper this time, directed fully at her. Clara froze, her knuckles white against the rim of a pot. The sting of the words wasn't new, she had been overlooked, mocked, underestimated many times before. But this was different. He had dragged her into the theater of humiliation, making her a spectacle for the room. The sous chef smirked, the waiters chuckled nervously, and Moreau basked in the power of their cruel chorus. Inside, Clara's chest burned. She could correct him in an instant, expose his errors, silence his tyranny with a single, perfect phrase. She knew the grammar he butchered, the pronunciations he trampled on, the beauty of the language he abused. But speaking out meant risk. A maid had no voice in this kingdom of fire and knives. The humiliation reached its peak when Moreau raised his arms dramatically and shouted, "This is ma cuisine. My kingdom. Ici, je suis le roi. And you all, He waved dismissively at the staff. You are nothing. Especially you, la petite maid. Comprenez-vous? Nothing. The words hung heavy, a public execution of dignity. Clara lowered her gaze, swallowing her fury. The room laughed again, though softer this time, uncomfortable with the cruelty but too fearful to resist. And then came the final straw. Moreau, puffed up with his own performance, turned back toward her with a sneer. Tell me, maid, do you even understand what I say? Or are my words too intelligent for you? He stretched the syllables of intelligent like a knife across the cutting board, savoring the humiliation. Clara's heart pounded. Her secret pressed against her lips, desperate to be freed. For years she had hidden her fluency, burying the scholar she once was beneath dishwater and steam. But the moment had arrived, carved out by arrogance and cruelty. A challenge had been thrown, and soon, the kitchen would discover just how wrong they had been about the quiet maid. Clara has just endured the sharpest sting of humiliation, mocked in front of her peers by a man who hides his ignorance behind power. But the story is only heating up, because the one they underestimated is about to change everything. And if you're captivated by this moment, if you believe that the quiet, overlooked voices deserve to be heard, then join us. Subscribe now and be part of a community that celebrates the unexpected heroes, the ones who rise when no one expects it. More stories like this are waiting, and you won't want to miss them. The kitchen had fallen into a hush after Moreau's latest outburst. Pans hissed, knives clattered, but the energy had shifted. Clara stood motionless, the weight of his insult pressing against her like a stone. For years she had swallowed such moments, letting the bitterness dissolve in silence. But this time was different. He had asked her directly, mocking her ability to understand him. The challenge was laid bare. Her heart hammered, but her mind was clear. She straightened slowly, her hand still wet from the wash basin, her scarf slipping slightly as she lifted her chin. When she spoke, her voice was soft but precise, every syllable in perfect, fluid French. Je comprends très bien, she said, her accent flawless, her tone cutting through the kitchen noise like a blade. I understand perfectly. The room froze. A pot clattered to the floor, forgotten in a waiter's trembling hands. Moreau blinked, his face tightening with disbelief. The sous chefs glanced at one another, their smirks erased, replaced by wide-eyed shock. Clara stepped forward, her words steady. And if you truly wish to command in French, chef, perhaps you should use the correct words. Her eyes locked onto his, unwavering. She began to recite back the very phrases he had hurled, correcting each with calm precision. Where he had butchered grammar, she restored it. Where he had mangled pronunciation, she delivered it with crystalline clarity. Each correction was not shouted, not cruel, but devastatingly authoritative. The staff listened in stunned silence. Every word was a revelation, every phrase a reminder that the woman they dismissed as invisible possessed a mastery none of them had imagined. The waiters leaned forward, forgetting their fear. Even the clatter of the kitchen seemed to pause, as though the very flames were listening. Moreau's face reddened. He tried to interrupt, sputtering, vous n'avez pas le droit, but Clara continued, weaving her corrections seamlessly into his broken sentences. She was not mocking, not cruel, but undeniable. Each word silenced his protests, each phrase stripping away the illusion of his superiority. Finally, she stopped, letting the last corrected phrase hang in the air. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, a ripple moved through the kitchen, waiters exchanging incredulous looks, a sous chef muttering under his breath, Mon Dieu. Clara exhaled, her heart racing, but her gaze steady. For the first time, she was not just the maid. She was the voice that had pierced through arrogance, the quiet power that could no longer be ignored. And though Moreau still stood at the center of the kitchen, barking no orders now, it was clear to everyone that the balance of power had shifted. The kitchen had fallen into silence, the clattering of pots and sizzling pans forgotten as every pair of eyes remained locked on Clara. What had begun as a small correction was becoming something much larger, a reclamation of dignity, a revelation of hidden brilliance. Clara's voice, firm yet graceful, unfolded the very fabric of French culinary tradition. She quoted classical techniques, interweaving the history of words that the chef had carelessly mangled. Each sentence struck with precision, the kind of precision the chef himself had failed to wield. She spoke of sauces and textures, of cuts and presentations, but always through the lens of their linguistic roots, tying language and cuisine together in a way that made even the most jaded servers lean in to listen. A sommelier, usually aloof, whispered under his breath, "She knows, she really knows." A guest peeking in from the dining hall raised an eyebrow, fascinated. This was no longer the chaos of a kitchen, it was a lecture, a performance, and Clara stood at its center with quiet authority. The chef, red-faced and trembling, tried to interject. "Enough of this. You think because you memorized some words," but before he could finish, Clara shifted into flawless, flowing French, not the clipped commands he barked but the eloquence of a native speaker versed in nuance. She recited passages from Brilliance, seamlessly connecting culinary philosophy with the very dishes they were preparing. Each syllable cut sharper than any knife. A hush spread deeper, thicker. Even the youngest apprentice cook, usually too timid to look up, stared in awe. Clara wasn't just correcting him anymore, she was teaching. And she was doing it with humility, never raising her voice, never belittling anyone else. Only the truth stood, undeniable, unshakable. From the doorway, a man cleared his throat. It was the visiting Michelin inspector, notebook in hand, who had slipped into the kitchen earlier unnoticed. He had been observing, quietly, watching how the restaurant ran under pressure. Now, he spoke. "Monsieur Chef," he said softly, "perhaps the young lady should continue. There is more wisdom in her explanation than in all the shouting I have heard tonight." The word struck like a bell. The staff froze. The chef's authority, once absolute, fractured in an instant. He swallowed hard, but his pride bound his tongue. Clara, however, bowed her head. "I am only a maid, sir," she replied, her French still pure and elegant. "I only wish to preserve the truth of your language and of your food." The inspector closed his notebook. "And yet, mademoiselle, you have preserved more than that. You have reminded us that respect and knowledge walk hand in hand. A kitchen should be led not by fear, but by mastery." A murmur of agreement rippled across the room. The waiters, once cowed, straightened their backs. The cooks, who had long endured the chef's tyranny, found courage in Clara's example. Even the dishwashers, hands dripping with suds, beamed with quiet pride, knowing one of their own had risen to such heights. The chef opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, silence was his prison. And in that silence, Clara's truth reigned. The balance of power in the kitchen had shifted, not through force, but through knowledge, humility, and undeniable skill. She had not only corrected a mistake, she had silenced arrogance, lifted spirits, and restored dignity to an entire room. The climax was not in her victory alone, but in the ripple of liberation she left behind. What was once a room of fear had become, if only for a moment, a space of respect. The kitchen remained in stunned silence long after Clara's last words had faded. Steam curled upward from pots, plates sat half prepared, and yet no one moved, as though afraid to break the fragile new order that had just emerged. Clara, hands folded before her, stood with quiet dignity, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Then it began, the shift. It started as a whisper among the waiters. "Did you hear her? Did you see what she just did?" Soon the murmur spread through the entire staff, a wave of awe swelling into open admiration. Apprentices exchanged glances that were no longer fearful but inspired. The sous chefs nodded subtly, acknowledging the authority Clara had displayed, one they themselves had never dared to challenge. One of the waiters, the same who had snickered at her moments before, spoke aloud. "She speaks better French than any of us," he admitted, his voice carrying across the kitchen. Heads turned toward Clara, nodding in agreement. The inspector, still at the doorway, closed his notebook deliberately and addressed the room. "Excellence," he said, "is not measured in shouting. It is measured in mastery." And tonight, it was Clara who demonstrated mastery. His words echoed like a gavel striking down judgment. The room erupted in low gasps, the kind that signal a verdict everyone feels in their bones. Chef Moreau's face had gone pale beneath the flush of his earlier rage. He tried to gather himself, to reclaim even a shred of his lost dominance. This is absurd," he stammered. "She's just a maid. She knows nothing of haute cuisine." But the inspector raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "No, Monsieur Moreau. She knows something far greater. She knows respect. And she has shown us that precision of language reflects precision of craft. You, on the other hand, have relied on intimidation. That is not leadership." The word struck deep, not just into Moreau's pride but into the hearts of every cook, waiter, and dishwasher present. They had lived under his tyranny, but now his authority lay in pieces. The justice of the moment was undeniable. One by one, members of the staff began to react. A sous chef who had endured countless beratings stepped forward, standing at Clara's side. "She has taught us more in 5 minutes than he has in 5 years, he said firmly. Others nodded in solidarity. The balance had shifted completely. As for Moreau, his arrogance crumbled into desperation. He shouted orders, but no one moved. His commands, once absolute, now rang hollow. He tried to intimidate with glares, but the staff no longer looked away. In that moment, the punishment was clear. The kitchen had withdrawn its obedience. His power had evaporated. The inspector turned his back to Moreau and addressed Clara. "Tell me, mademoiselle, if you were not a maid, what would you wish to be?" Clara shook her head, humility in every gesture. "I only wish to serve honestly," she replied softly. "My work is simple, but it has worth. I need no title beyond that." The room went silent again, not in fear, but in reverence. Here was a woman who, even with all eyes on her, even with her triumph undeniable, chose not arrogance but humility. Her victory was not to seize the chef's place, nor to humiliate him in return, but simply to restore dignity, to herself and to the truth. The inspector smiled faintly. "Then know this, Clara, tonight you have taught us all. And though you claim no title, in my eyes you hold the authority of a master." The staff erupted in applause, some clapping hesitantly at first, others with wholehearted conviction. For the first time, the kitchen did not applaud a dish, a service, or the chef. It applauded Clara, the quiet maid who had silenced arrogance with knowledge. As for the antagonists, justice found each in turn. The waiters who had laughed now felt the sting of their mockery, their shame etched into every glance at Clara. The sous chefs who had smirked realized they had bowed to a lesser authority while ignoring the brilliance beside them. And Chef Moreau? He found himself standing alone, his reign reduced to rubble in mere minutes. Where once his voice had ruled the room, now it carried no more weight than an empty pan clattering to the floor. But Clara did not linger in their downfall. The very next morning, she returned to her duties as always, sweeping the same floor, washing the same dishes, moving through the same rhythms of work. Yet those who watched her now did so with new eyes. No longer invisible, she was a quiet presence that commanded respect without asking for it. Her life remained humble, her work unchanged, but her story lingered in every corner of the kitchen. And when whispers spread beyond those walls, when patrons heard of the maid who had silenced a chef with flawless French, the tale carried with it a message: greatness is not found in status or volume, but in knowledge, humility, and the courage to speak when it matters most. Clara never sought recognition, but it found her nonetheless. And though she returned to her simple life, those who had witnessed her triumph carried the lesson forward: respect must be earned, not demanded, and true mastery often comes from the most unexpected places. And so, Clara's story reminds us that true power doesn't come from shouting the loudest or holding the highest title. It comes from knowledge, humility, and the courage to speak when no one expects it. A maid silenced arrogance not with anger, but with quiet brilliance, and in doing so, she changed the way everyone in that kitchen would see respect forever. If Clara's triumph moved you, take a moment to share your thoughts below. What lesson did you take from her courage? Let's build a community where stories like this inspire us to stand tall, even in the most unexpected places. And if you believe in celebrating hidden strength and unexpected victories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss the next story. Because sometimes, the quietest voices carry the greatest truths.